Floor, I'm Anthony DeCurtis. Computers have infiltrated every aspect of the way we listen to and create music. Can that possibly be good?
Welcome to the dawn. You've just accessed the beautiful experience. Playground for the new power generation. There are over 500 experiences to choose from. Here's a sample.
Many musicians are welcoming the computer age with open arms, inviting fans themselves to participate in their music.
Welcome to the real world. Hi, I'm Peter Gabriel. The way you're going to play this disc is by choosing which bit of me you want to find out a little more about.
Or even replacing their traditional instruments with computerized keyboards.
After all, we have only 12 notes to deal with, and we've used up most of those combinations a long time ago. So we've got to find more and more revolutionary ways to utilize sounds to change the ground rules of music.
Most of what I do comes out of a computer, but I don't think it necessarily sounds like it came out of a computer. Some of it does, and I like the sound of that anyway.
But not all musicians do, and the computer's place in the world of music has become the focus of controversy.
I've never understood that, why you would want to type up a number and use that sound. It's much more fun to move the microphone around or to bang on something.
Where will this technological revolution ultimately lead?
I think with this generation who grow up, watching MTV, playing games, they're coming out with a different sensibility, and when they get all this fantastically powerful equipment in their hands, they're going to come up with things that we, can't conceive of yet.
Don't have to be afraid, just have fun.
Here to discuss the marriage of music and technology is our panel of technological wizards, beginning with J.D. Considine of the Baltimore Sun, also writes for Rolling Stone, Amy Linden, a music writer for the New York Times and the San Francisco Chronicle, Scott Poulson-Bryant, a senior writer at Vibe magazine, and our special guest, recording artist, producer, and all-purpose experimentalist, Brian Eno, whose most recent projects are the Passengers album with the members of U2, and Help, a compilation album to benefit the Bosnia relief project, War Child. Brian, it's been said that video killed the radio star. Are computers going to kill musicians?
No. I mean, computers are just another tool as far as I'm concerned, and in themselves neutral, but they're so incredibly tedious to use that they do tend to bring out the worst in people, I think. Quite often the only people who actually learn to master computers are sort of train spotters. You don't have train spotters in America, but in England we have people called train spotters who, for absolutely no money, stand on railway stations writing down the numbers of trains as they come through for years. They'll do this in fact, most of their life will be spent doing this. They always wear anoraks. They're sometimes called anoraks as well. And unfortunately, computers, because of the limitations of their design and the under-evolution of their design, have sort of fallen into the hands, rather, of people like that, I think.
Yeah. You said in an interview...
Amy, do we still need musicians?
Do you still need, well, yes, you need musicians to pick up in bars.
Most importantly.
Yes, and, well, I mean, you can't, if you're not a musician and you're just like, like you said, like a nerd, that's like an American train spotter, I guess. If you're just a nerd playing with computers, then you go work at a major corporation and you fix their computers. I mean, no one would ever confuse.
But what happens when you're a nerd playing with computers, making really wonderful sounds that people can kind of groove to?
Well, I mean, look,
then you're a musician.
I think to get back to the point that you were making about computers, Brian, was that you said in an interview once that there's not enough Africa in them. I mean, I guess in a sense, the interface is too much like a calculator for it to be anything except a very linear plus-minus approach. And the problem is that you can do with the circuitry an awful lot more than just calculate. I mean, if you listen to what Trent Reznor does with a computer with 9 Inch Nails, I mean, he'll take a guitar sound and digitize it, put it up on a screen, and edit it in a way that you manipulate the sound in a way that you simply could not do any other way. And he will have greater control over that manipulation than he would if he was just using a stomp box like other guitarists do. And I mean, that level, I think it's tremendously creative. But
what happens to the craft of music and all that? I mean, what we traditionally think of as...
That is the craft of music.
Yeah.
Working with sound is also the craft of music. In fact, one of the great innovations of rock music, I think, or popular recorded music, shall we say, is understanding that sound is actually a material that you can work with. This wasn't something that could happen in classical music because you were stuck with fixed instruments.
Right.
A violin had a particular island of possibilities about what it could be, and a clarinet was another island of possibilities. Well, now, of course, you can work with sound as a sort of infinite field.
As the instrument, the sound being the instrument itself. I think that that opens it up, though, to more people.
Well, it does.
Yeah, sure.
I think probably the greatest example of work that you've been involved with that does that is on the U2 album, and now, of course, I've completely forgotten the specific song, but there's one of the songs starts off with a wah-wah guitar sound, which is like the biggest wow type of sound, which you couldn't get out of a pedal board. It's all sound manipulation, and that's the strongest hook in the whole song.
That's Mysterious Ways.
Mysterious Ways.
Right. Yeah. See, and that's why, I remember the guitar sound.
Sing that for us, Scott.
But the point is, I remember the guitar sound. I don't remember the name of the song.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks exactly to what you're saying.
Record company would be very pleased about that.
He's off islands
be a memo to Brian, probably, by the time he gets home.
My brother and I used to play a game, which is to stand over the record player. This was when you had albums.
And record players.
drop the needle on for the shortest possible time. And the other person had to guess what it was.
And try to ID the song?
And it was amazing how frequently you could do that. On a quarter of a second of sound, you could say, oh, that's definitely the Byrds, or that's definitely Jimi Hendrix, or something like that.
Some kids in the South Bronx started, like, doing that and then moving the records backwards and getting the scratch sound. And
yes.
That's the
which developed into, like, sampling.
Right, that's a history of hip-hop almost, is like knowing which cool 5, 3, 2-second bit of a record would make.
And you have to have a musician's ear. I mean, there's always like this big argument, you know, like, oh, it's not music because you didn't study at Berkeley or Juilliard or something like that. But I don't know, man, you got to be a musician to know when to drop that damn turntable or that tone arm down.
Well,
you know, you have to know music, in other words.
When Branford Marsalis played with Public Enemy, he said that working with the Bomb Squad, you know, the production team that Public Enemy was using at the time, he said they were not school musicians in any way, shape, or form, but they were still really good musicians. They knew how to arrange the sound, and they kind of knew how to deal with the harmonic possibilities in an instinctual way that having training would almost make you not want to do. I mean, they had him blow over a couple of chord changes, and then they ran them what he played over the chords different than the one he was playing over, and it worked to your ear. But if you would have
meanwhile, his brother Wynton is defined rap music as cursing over a rhythm track.
Well,
and
that sounds like a very good thing to do, actually.
As opposed to what, cursing over
rhythm
nothing?
Tracks many times. Yeah, really.
That's domestic violence, then, you know. Obviously, it like plays like sort of like devil's advocate or whatever, but I mean, there's always people who say that you have these kids who are schooled in technology, but they're not schooled in traditional musicianship, and that you have kids growing up today who don't know how to play instruments.
Good. But that's all I can say.
Right. Wait. Why would you say that? What would be? Why is that good?
We've had several hundred years of people who know how to play instruments. We know what kind of music we can get from that.
Exactly.
One of the great things about popular music is that it keeps absorbing new types of talents.
Right.
You know, as a new generation of instruments appear, suddenly people who wouldn't have had a place in music before, like me, can have a place because they can think of a way of using this medium.
Yeah.
For instance, I could not have been a musician or a composer at all without the recording studio. That's a complete condition of anything that I can do.
It also fits in perfectly with like the Republican budget cuts because they're cutting all the money out for arts anyway, so all you need is like machines, and these kids don't have to learn how to, you know.
But you know, I mean,
wait, we have to take a break, but when we go back, we'll have more with Brian Eno and music and technology, so stay with us.
For me as an artist, it's an astounding world of opportunities into which I'm becoming rapidly immersed.
Are you prepared to...
Great rhythm section, and
Never liked them.
Great guitar player.
Always hate it.
Hi, I'm Nancy Wilson.
And I'm Ann Wilson, and we'd like to invite you now to crawl into cyberspace with us, your friends.
This is a mouse.
This is the mouse.
It won't bite you.
No, it won't hurt you at all.
Welcome back to Four on the Floor. I'm Anthony DeCurtis, crawling back out of cyberspace, hopefully back here in the real world.
With your dignity.
Barely. Scott, Tell us about sampling a little bit. I mean, that's one significant aspect of this interface between computers and music these days.
Oh well, hip hop obviously is the music that people jump on
The young
as
people.
as not really music. But like from the thing Brian talked about dropping the needle, put the needle on the record, as they say in hip hop parlance. Started out as a kind of like rappers rap to a beat from another record, from some established record, and the advent of computers and music has allowed producers, DJs to sample old songs into like the groove of a new song. And I think the height of sampling, in my opinion, is like Prince Paul's work with De La Soul, that an entire song can be built from like a sample from a Bee Gees song from Greece and a Steely Dan song and like a Chicago song.
Or what
and
PM Dawn does, what Prince
all put
does
together
too.
the way PM Dawn works.
Yeah.
And I think that's where computers are like a valuable asset to the creation of music.
Right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump in here, but I mean the thing is, I think this is where the computer aspect is evident, is that if it's just turntable scratching, where you're simply appropriating a block from one record and a block from another record, that's not really, that doesn't give you as much option to be creative as being able to take samples and be able to manipulate them and edit them and layer them and do things to them that you couldn't do through any other medium. To sort of, it's like sound mixing. It's not even, it's not straight linear the way that.
It's collage. That's really what it is. It's like collage.
And I think that, frankly, is what is the real music in sampling. It's not the appropriation, it's knowing how to take the appropriate thing.
Because what it is ultimately is, I mean, to be a musician, you have to have ears, if not chops. I mean, if you have just the ears to hear the way the sounds can be put together, you're as much a musician as someone who picks up a guitar and strums some chords.
Exactly, but it's not just putting...
I call that the transition from skill to judgment. Because in fact, being a musician used to mean having the digital skill, meaning to say the finger skills to operate an instrument. But it's become more and more clear that isn't the issue anymore. What matters now is the ability to make judgments about what you can do with it.
Exactly.
You can actually do anything very easily. I could teach anybody to make a record in half a day using sequences and that sort of thing. What would make it a good record is whether their judgment is any good.
It's much more democratic, though. It's much more democratic if anybody can make a record.
But then what do you have? I mean, what about the traditional criteria by which?
Anthony, this is what I'm going to say. I mean, you're absolutely right, Brian. I mean, musical technique is like woodworking skills. I mean, there are certain things you have to be able to do, and it helps if you can properly plane the table or play in tune. But I mean, at the end of the day, what really matters is if you make a nice, you make just a chair, or do you make a beautiful piece of cabinetry.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how you got there.
That's the difference between art and craft, and that really is what the issue is.
But somebody might say it's the difference between, do you make it yourself or do you go and buy it? I mean, if you could just press a button to get it.
You have the good taste to buy it, and you have a credit card that affords you to buy it. What's the difference?
Then you're an artist too.
Still got it, right?
My God, I've just been elevated.
You also are blurring the issue. You're the difference between a computer from a consumer end and from the production end. I mean, I don't think there is a program out there where you can press a button and you get a song.
And it's not that easy to do. I mean, people used to always say about hip-hop, anybody can just rap over a P-Funk sample. Well, no, obviously anybody can't because everybody has it, and you can tell the good stuff from the bad stuff. I mean, it's not that easy, and it takes a lot of skills to decide what you're going to put together. I mean, we were talking about PM Dawn. I mean, those guys put together songs from the most ridiculous sources. I mean, Deep Purple, Kraftwerk, well, not the Beatles because they can't get the Beatles samples, but all sorts of wacky stuff, and you can't figure out, and it's all computer. There's not a live instrument to be found, and that gives you a degree of control, which, I mean, is sort of cool, If you want to see a live band, go see a live band.
I will grant this one tragedy, I think, and the problem is that it's not there, how should I put this? If you can do everything yourself with machines, the one skill you don't learn is how to relate to other musicians. And I think that's the biggest problem.
I think I can always hear sequences, and I don't like what I hear. And what I hear that I don't like is the tidiness of them. Sequences emphasize secretarial skills. That's marvelous.
And it's like hermetically sealed almost.
Yes, that's right. And their sequenced music is of necessity vertically bolted together. Everything's tied to the beat in a funny way. Now, if you listen to played music, one of the dynamics that's interesting in played music is that sometimes it floats around in relation to, it's several layers float around, and sometimes they very dramatically lock together. You hear it particularly in jazz, where things are allowed to get loose and floaty, and then suddenly it's pop, everything comes together. Now, that's a thrilling moment, but if that moment is there all the time, it isn't thrilling any longer.
Yeah.
It's rather boring, actually.
So how does all this affect the idea of live music too?
That's the thing is that you can't play computers live. I mean, essentially, you've got a bunch of people up there pushing buttons and running DAT tapes. It's really boring to watch, and I think one of the reasons why so many live R&B shows are disappointing is you have people who are used to playing with these, singing rather to these really contemporary R&B, minus it, yeah. And they don't, but they go out with bands that are really, third rate. Whereas when you saw the old Stax Volt Review, you saw Booker T and the MGs up there, a band that could play like this. So when you went out to see The Time, they played really well, and you could hear the tension within the music, and it was live.
But there's place. I mean, the thing is, I enjoyed that experience. I mean, I remember seeing like Tony live, and it was like, wow, I'm really seeing like an R&B, right? Yeah, right before Janet Jackson came on, and then I saw like Memorex, So you can have both. I mean, one is not better than the other. I mean, you can have both. But when you go to a club, it's dance. You don't want to see a rock band. You want to hear like
Brian,
sequencers.
you've moved back and forth a lot between projects. Working with very traditional bands in a certain sense, like U2, and then doing obviously your own more experimental stuff. How do you make that transition? I mean, how do you move back and forth across that line?
It's not difficult.
Comfortably, actually.
I find that the same kinds of issues interest me in all of these things. And one of them is this thing we talked about earlier of sonic texture. But the other is I'm more and more interested in what happens outside the music. Now, most of what happens in a studio is concerned with what happens inside the music. What sounds do we use? What chords do we use? What beats do we use? What words do we use? All that sort of thing. That's all internal to the question of what the music is. What I get more and more interested in is what frame do we put this all in? Where does it belong in the wide world? What story do we tell about it? And one of the reasons that rap interests me so much is that it's a way of taking a number of pre-existing stories and binding them together so that they become part of something new.
Retelling the stories, right?
Yeah, when you use a James Brown sample, you're not just using a piece of sound. You're using a whole lot of connotations and a whole lot of previous messages, So this has made that such a very rich music, so much richer than actually what most people are doing in studios. And it's made it much messier as well, which I always appreciate.
Which is always a good thing.
We have to take a break right now, but when we come back, each of our panelists will take the floor to tell us what to listen for in music and in music news. So stay with us.
And it's also giving lawyers here.
And you go as well. Welcome back to Four on the Floor. I'm Anthony DeCurtis, and it's that time of the show where each of our panel tells us what they've been listening to and what's on their minds. J.D. Considine.
Well, one of the things I've been listening to is a group that has kind of that sort of postmodern aesthetic that Brian was espousing earlier. Pizzicato 5 is actually a duo from Japan, and they have something like a dozen albums out in Japan. This is their second full album in the United States. It's called The Sound of Music by Pizzicato 5, and it's a wonderful blend of all kinds of sort of cheesy 60s pop sounds, like a lot of Burt Bacharach influenced stuff, a fair amount of Mancini type things, but with a strong club beat. Beautiful singing by this woman, Maki Nomiya, and really great lyrics, what you can make out in English. About 15% is in English, the rest is in Japanese. And if you're a hardcore fan like I am, you'll actually want to not only get The Sound of Music, which has some new stuff on it, but their total new album in Japan, which is called Romantique Kyujan Hyoku, I think. No.
Where's John Takata to translate for him?
Anyway, off the shelves. Scott.
You're scared of him.
I'm listening to the new Smashing Pumpkins CD, Melancholy.
On the other hand.
Infinite Sadness. A friend of mine said to me recently, we had the Smashing Pumpkins versus Pearl Jam debate. I get into those every so often, and he said, you have to like Eddie Vedder because he hurts so well. And I said, but Billy Corgan hurts a lot more melodically and a lot smarter than Mr. Eddie Vedder. And it's a sprawling double album. There's a lot of stuff that probably shouldn't have been put on the record, but sounds amazing anyway. Billy's voice takes some getting used to. But he's like the new Prince to me. He's like the little angst-ridden adolescent holed up in the studio turning out beautiful tracks.
There you go.
I'm a big fan.
Def Leppard. Dude, no, see, See, right here in the back of this is the Def Leppard Greatest Hits record. On the back here, this says this is a product of Bludgeoned Riffola Limited. And I think that kind of sums it up. Right? I mean, I don't need to say any more. This is Oasis, but without all the hype, basically. You know? I mean, I like Oasis too, but this is just great, and it's really loud, and it has all the hits. And I mean all the hits. There's not a new track to be had here. I hate when they take these compilation records and they put new stuff on it. Ugh, who wants that? Pour some sugar on me. Scott, the greatest song ever? Photograph.
Is the greatest song ever.
That's great. I'm going to take my driver's ed test, I think, soon, and I'm going to take it to this.
There you go.
Thank you. I heard a producer here. I should, you know, something produced.
Perhaps Def Leppard for your next project. But perhaps you could tell us now about the Help project a little bit, the War Child project.
Yes, embarrassingly, the record I've been listening to lately is one I was involved in. And I'm sort of anxious to deny that this is an act of hype here, but in fact I really love this record. I didn't have much to do with it, so I can qualify my interest in it. This was a record that was recorded in one day. It was recorded on a Monday, 20 bands in 20 different studios, and it was released on Saturday, and it went platinum on Sunday.
What could possibly be better?
Man.
And it was made for a charity called War Child, which is operating in Bosnia, helping children who are the victims of war there. And the project was such a lot of fun to do. Nobody let us down. All the bands who said they would take part not only took part, but delivered really good stuff. It's a really good album, and it's a complete cross-section of modern English music. It's the Britpop pack. You know.
Thank you, Brian. The album is called Help. It's to benefit Bosnian War victims. And that's it for this week on Four on the Floor. Thanks to our regular panelists. Thanks to Brian Eno for joining us. And come and join us again next time. I'm Anthony DeCurtis.
It was a time not so long ago when greed roamed the earth and new wave ruled the charts. Journey back to the big 80s, next on VH1.